Good afternoon. Thank you for waiting. Sorry about the slightly delayed start. I hope you've had a nice little relaxing chat while we're getting things going. Can you hear me okay, sort of everywhere? Yeah. Okay. So, welcome to this session on improvisation, a response to complexity in class and school management. A fine title. And my question to you is, hands up if you write a lesson plan. You know what's coming, don't you? Hands up if you follow it. Okay. Yeah, okay, sure. And so what do you do when you don't follow it? You know. Okay, well that's a fine word for it. But what is actually going on? What keeps you in touch? What tells you what to do? Learners, students, intuition. So we've got stuff coming from outside, learners and students, stuff coming from inside, intuition in response to what's coming from outside. What else is going on that keeps you doing something? Fear. Yeah, no, it's very honest, yes. Yeah. And in fact, it's a very good answer because fear, stage fright, we're going to come on to these things in a moment, are, those are the kinds of things that kill intuition, as you know very well yourself. And as our students know, when they come to take tests and score at perhaps lower than they might have done. So, something's going on there as well. Now, just in 2012, I did a talk, a plenary talk in Glasgow, which was about mess and progress. And I was looking at complexity and leadership. In 2013, I did a talk with Alan Maley, which was about preparation and preparedness, and introduced the idea of improvisation and spontaneity. How does that come into it? We don't talk about it very much, but we do it a lot as teachers. And then in 2015, last year, my talk was on jazz and the dark matter of teaching. Was anyone at that? Okay, so somebody were. Yeah, I was as well. And jazz and the dark matter of teaching. And that was about improvisation and teaching. I want to take that idea further and also to include in it things other than teaching that take place in a school. So, the story so far, which is sort of more or less what I might have said last year, but I can't remember, is basically this. Can you read that? Yeah. Because if you can, then I don't need to read it out. I would only read it out if I run out of anything to say, which is how we use lesson plans anyway. So, basically, this idea that we've got the plan, but once the lesson is up to operating temperature, we don't necessarily go by it. We'll refer back to it, we'll have a quick look at it, but other stuff starts to happen. And that's what interests me. What is that other stuff, and where does it come from? I was also saying, this time last year, that our received methodology kind of relies on impro. I'm going to call it improv, but I only mean improvisation, I don't mean anything else. Relies on impro, but doesn't observe it and doesn't describe it. It doesn't really tick observational boxes very well. So we rely on it. Of course we rely on it. We couldn't possibly just go in and woodenly follow a lesson plan, though sometimes we may do that. And this is, I suppose, my point. It has no discourse of its own. There is not a discourse of improvisation in what we do. Hence, the name last year, the dark matter of teaching, which is that impro's everywhere, it affects everything, it affects the entire quality of our lesson and the way we teach, and yet we don't recognize it. So it's like the dark matter in the universe, which we can't really pin down. We know it's out there, and it affects everything, but we can't lay our hands on it, can't measure it, can't even see it. So the dark matter of teaching. However, some performance art specifically trained for this. Theatre is one. You go to the theatre school, and you're going to be working on impro, amongst other things, from day one. And talking about it, and have a discourse of it, and develop quality criteria for impro, or jazz, and in fact many other performance arts. And we do for teaching, so we don't talk about it. It's left up to your own sort of individuality to find your way in it. However, principles emerge. And one of them is that improv is not just anything goes. It's not just sort of random spontaneity. That's not what we're talking about. Improv happens off the back of something else. It has a structure to push against. It has a discipline. We are fond of saying in multiple contexts, to be free, you need a discipline to be free with. To be freedom and discipline, you need discipline to be free. We need to be free off the back of something. And what is that? Charles Mingus, bass player, you can't improvise on nothing. You've got to improvise on something. Okay, pretty straightforward, but it's like, that's number one thing, that's number one principle. Improvise on something. So, what? What is that something? Well, in music, it might be the sheet music. And then you improvise away from it. You play the music, but then you get the stuff we talked about last time. In teaching, it might be the lesson plan. You've got the lesson plan, but actually that's the thing you don't do. But you couldn't do what you do unless you have the lesson plan, which you aren't doing. So, we should wonder at that, because that's a curious and very interesting state of affairs, which tells us something that we don't follow up. What is the something? What guides you when you leave the plan? We started to talk about that, and if we brainstorm it, we'll find a whole bunch of other related things, like intuition, prior knowledge, experience, fear, and so on and so on. Two of the things I want to come back to are, we're guided by intention, which is a sort of sense of where I want to go, but it's not actually a concrete game plan. And contingency, which is like what's happening around us now. Me wanting to get somewhere and what's happening around. It's rather like in the days of ocean sailing in the 1800s, 1700s, people could mostly circumnavigate the globe. They didn't always come back, but quite often they did. And the thing is, the wind could blow from any direction. Isn't that amazing? And still, mostly, they'd get where they wanted to go. Mostly. So there was the intention, there was a direction, there was a journey to be had, and there was whatever happened. And somehow, with the intention and the contingency, you find your way. Let's come back a bit more to what is improv. So, something about, I'm not going to try and pin it right down because that's not helpful at the moment. Something that brings together the fresh contingency of the moment, what's happening here now, with previous experience. And this is happening in response to the new situation. And we need both, perhaps. We need the improv to keep us in touch with what's now, what's going on in front of us. And we need our past experience to keep us in touch with what we know from the past. We need a mix. But maybe if we get too much in touch with the past, we're going to miss what's happening now. And if we get kind of stuck in the present moment in the wrong way, we may miss our experience from the past that could help to guide us. We just play with we're in the boat and we play with the wind, but we're not really clued up about how to adjust the sails. In theatre, there are two basic principles. There are more, but here are two of the fundamental ones. One is accepting the offer. You're all familiar with that, if not in those words. And the other is being open. They're connected, of course. Accepting the offer means what happens, you work with. And you can see this most clearly in improvised comedy, which is quite popular these days. For example, there was a show that came from America, the UK, like 10 or 15 years ago or more, called Whose Line Is It Anyway? Did you ever see that? And you see that's really a good bunch of genuine spontaneity, but they each had a rule to go by, which enabled them to improvise against it. And in nearly all cases, what someone does is taken up by the other. It's an advanced position to be able to refuse the offer, the thing that the other person says. Rather, you accept it and build on it. Rather like a student who makes a mistake, so we go there and we work with it. We are accepting that offer. That's the offer that they've just made. Or the difficulty that the student has, or the thing that is shouted out, or indeed the silence that the student makes. That is the offer. And do we work with it, or do we ignore it and go back to the plan? It's a choice. But if I go back into myself, I'm then likely to ignore the offer. We can't accept all offers, so we've got to discriminate as we go. But we need to be really alert to the offer when it comes. Why? Because, as all of us know very well, that's where the energy is. And if I'm going to keep going back to my plan to restart the lesson, as it were to reboot the lesson, the amount of energy that I put in is enormous. And the amount the students get out is very little, because we're never going with the flow. We never reach flow. We never reach operating temperature. And the other, of course, is a state of openness which enables me to hear the offer, to see it as an offer. Offers aren't always offers. I mean, sometimes offers are, you know, we see them as cases of discipline, you know, and maybe they are sometimes. Quality in improvisation. Here's 3 or 4 different categories just to get us thinking, and then I'm going to move on to something else. So, my idea for the moment is that improvisation, I'm largely guided by the present, by what is happening here now under my nose. Whether it's in theatre, whether it's in comedy, whether it's in jazz, or whether it's in the classroom, or whether it's in managing a teacher's meeting, or interviewing students on the first day, or dealing with all the other things that happen in a school. Improvisation, being guided by the present. I respond afresh. I'm informed by what's going on now. Non-impro, this is my own term, non-impro, is where I'm sort of improvising, but actually I'm not, because I'm guided by the past. I'm guided by what worked last time, a familiar phrase for teachers, of course. And sometimes what works last time works this time. So we kind of think, oh, that's cool. It worked last time, it'll work this time. And then suddenly it doesn't. In music, it's called hot licks, where a musician has hot licks that they can reel off very quickly on the saxophone or instrument, and actually don't have to be related to the musical conversation at all. And so you resort to your hot licks, which is a way of being guided by the past rather than by what's happening right now. We all do it. It's not a wrong thing, but we're looking for the balance. Then there's something which I call following the plan. This is not bad, it's not good. The others aren't bad or good. A plan may scaffold the improvisation in ways that we've kind of already referred to. But on the other hand, if I'm too stuck with a plan, it may occlude what's happening now. I don't see what's happening now because I'm with my plan too much, or with myself, or with what happened last time. So there's always this kind of balancing, a judgment, fine judgment to be made. I just said that. The plan can go either way. And we know that. Actually, you go into the class and you are happy when you are taken away from the plan, because it means there's energy coming which you can work with. And you, as a teacher, are, as it were, transformer of energy into the intention that you have, which is doing something with English, or with a language. But also the plan can help us to override the offer. I go back to my plan, I keep missing signals. So, as I said last year, we need a non-stick plan, one that doesn't get us stuck. Now, last year the metaphor was jazz, and this year the metaphor is classical music. All right, and actually the metaphor is improvisation in classical music. Now, this is pretty interesting. So, if you're underweight, wake up now. Until the mid-19th century, perhaps a bit before that, perhaps a bit after that, performing and improvising were part of the same thing in the tradition that we now call classical. They did both. People expected you to do both. People didn't have records to listen to, and yet, amazingly, they listened very well the first time, or the few times they could hear, and they got to know lots and lots of music. You know, they weren't lazy listeners like I might be now, because I can just turn it on any other time. But one of the things, and this is documented, people would kind of expect musicians to play it differently each time. They'd expect a new interpretation. Let's stick on the same record, we want to hear that thing done differently. And, you know, the great composers were known as improvisers. This is an extraordinary thing. We don't realise that today, because something has happened in classical music. And today's separation of these disciplines of performing and improvising, that separation would kind of just unthinkable, unimaginable in the times from which this music originated. So here's some interesting things. Just imagine that. It's not very hard to imagine, though even when I read it now, it's a slight shock, because you can imagine him improvising. There's no way of recording anything, so what's he going to do? Well, he's got to write it down. What's he going to write down? Stuff that came out of the improvisation. Will it be equal to the improvisation? Probably not. Will it be more organised than the improvisation? Quite possibly, because that's something you can do after the event when you put it down on paper. So, there we are with Handel. And who we got next? Mozart. First famous as an improviser. People would go along and be astonished at his improvisation, his capacity to make up music. But that's what being a musician was about. It wasn't about playing the classics, because he hadn't written them yet. Yeah, this is interesting. There's George Sand, a friend of Chopin, and this is what he says. His music's great, but it's a pale shadow of what the improvisation that I heard him do. Beethoven improvised in public right to the end of his life. That was his thing to do. But he also composed stuff because he couldn't record it. Of course he had to write it down so people could go off and play it. And that's how the only way you could get known. You couldn't really just be an improviser because there's nothing left at the end of it. You have to write it down. So what do you write down? It's called composing. And Schubert, he would have enjoyed an IATEFL conference, I think. Just imagine it. So, but what is your impression of Schubert these days? If you know only a bit about it, well, like me, another of these sort of classical composers that lived sort of. Okay, now, this is just a different route through improvisation to come back to the idea that it can be done. David Dolan, who's he? Well, this is who he is. Have you heard of that before? Professor of Classical Improvisation? See, that's what he is. And at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama. So they must be a bit ahead of the game. And if you're going to study music, that might be the place to go to. Now, what he did was, firstly, he started out studying parallel between speech and musical improvisation. Speech improvisation, musical improvisation. And then he began to focus on improvisation and its effect on musicianship and on creativity in classical musicians who've already got the dots written in front of them. See, and already therein lies the problem. Once you've got the dots, obviously, after a generation's gone by, something else is going to emerge. You're now a dot reader rather than an improviser. So, he said, let's bring improv back into classical music. And he's got a method. And if you Google David Dolan, or you go to david-dolan.com, you'll find some most delightful a walkthrough of his methodology with little videos, each of 3 or 4 minutes, showing him working with classical students, so teenagers and older, early 20s typically, but others as well. They're classical musicians. And it's completely riveting. It's somehow more riveting than a classical concert because it's got all the tension of it being made up as it goes along. And you can hear the sort of the need to respond to somebody else, and it evokes in you the wish to respond, and then you hear the person, the classical musician, doing it, including the notes that may or may not be right, whatever that means. And what the student begins to find is that she can be informed by listening to now rather than reading what was done before. You understand what I'm saying? So suddenly, a huge I don't know if it's a weight off the shoulders, but anyway, a transformation, because no longer looking at that to know what to play, but now there isn't that at all, and having to listen here to know what to play, to listen to the others, to fit in. Now, as David Dolan says, when the students arrive, they are frightened. Can you imagine that? He's dealing, like what you were saying, with frightened students. And what are they frightened of? They're not just frightened of improvisation, which they're about to do with him. They're frightened because of this. Now, take everything with a pinch of salt, and I put things in brief, so it's apt to look exaggerated. But it's not very far from the truth, and you don't have to speak to very many classically trained musicians to find out that that's pretty much a summary. And I've done the same in the last few weeks with classical musicians that I know, trained, professional musicians. The joy has gone out. Instead, there is playing for approval and points, and there's standardizations, and you've got to follow it. And people are going to the concerts not to hear someone doing something beautifully different from last time, but to watch out for any wrong notes and bum notes, and you know, they know it all. And these musicians are masters of their own fear. So they are afraid, and the ones that succeed have got on top of it, and are able to deal with that somehow. But this obsession with no wrong notes, you know, this restricts the freedom to fly. And although we have wonderful, wonderful musicians today, where it's such a delight to listen to, but when you listen to someone who is free to do something a bit different, you hear something else, and you'll hear that on Dolan's videos if you care to listen to them. Well, we know this from language teaching and testing, of course. Now, these are some of the benefits of improv according to Dolan. And remember, he's talking about the benefits to classical musicians performing in concerts and other kinds of settings. First, joy. Re-enters the scene. Oh yeah, I'm doing this for joy. I forgot about that for 15 years. Joy. The joy of expression and of communication with an audience. I'm not saying that's absent, I'm just saying they rediscover a new connection with that. They discover that intuition and learnt structure can enhance each other. It's not just learnt structure. Your intuition and you can come to play on that as well. And again, this was kind of mentioned in the very brief conversation we had at the beginning. The big thing that he notices is, and that they notice, is a reduced fear of mistakes, of being judged, and, at the end of it all, a reduction of stage fright, which cripples many performing musicians. A reduction of stage fright. Stage fright is something whereby, because of the fear of judgment, your muscles seize up. And they don't flow. They fall out of coordination. And once you've got one little slip because the coordination is quite right, more follow in a kind of torrent. And they all know that, and that's what they're afraid of. So all the practice is to how to avoid that. And Dolan is saying the way to avoid it is to learn to improvise. Not in order not to play those dots, but in order not to begin to have these benefits. What he says is that it unblocks the blockages that students develop while becoming musicians. It helps flow. He talks very much about flow, as you can imagine. And this idea of the player becoming the composer. Here is the music. Now, you are right there in that music, and you are it's kind of more than interpretation. You are the composer. You and the composer are at one. Why not? Beethoven? It's a killer, isn't it? Because, you know, while you're worried about the wrong note, there isn't any passion. It's not like kind of both and. So somehow we've got to rejuggle that so the joy and the passion can come back. And yet somehow we've got a way of dealing with the so-called mistake. Miles Davis said something even more to the point. So what have you got to do to be able to say that with a degree of honesty? You know, how have you got to mean the word mistakes in order to be able to feel, yeah, I can say that. There aren't any mistakes. There are no such thing as mistakes. Catch a mistake means it's not so much whether it's that note or that note, it's what I do about it. It's the energy, it's the fear, it's my response to doing something which is different from what I'd slightly intended. Anyway, 3 useful statements on mistakes. 4 steps to improv. Last year I presented 7. This is a slightly different distillation and from a different source. So the first is interpretation. This is basically meaning playing the dots. But you can't just play the dots because you're not a machine. Whatever you do, different musicians are going to sound different playing the same dots. Even though I said to you, and you, play those dots, and you're all equally skilled, they're going to sound different because you can't help interpreting it. Your speed of playing, your psyche, your past experience, what you think is a good melody, how hard you want to hit the key, all those things. So already, when you just sit down to play exactly what's written, you are interpreting. So interpreting is kind of step 1. You could say that step 0, just playing the dots. But step 0 and step 1 are not really distinguishable. Then there's embellishment, where you really do begin to add decorations. Very clearly the melody, but you're adding other simple things, anticipating other notes that aren't quite there, but they're just decorations, not taking you away from the melody, but they're decorating it. And they're according to how you feel and your skill and what you want to say, what you want to inject. Then there's actual variations, where you will change some notes, but you'll still maintain a relationship with what went before, with the original melody. But you will change notes and phrases and even sections. So you're making variations, you're departing. And you're making up those variations. Of course, if they're written out variations, you're not. But if, you know, on the steps to improvisation, that's the next step, where you actually vary. We're going to have an experiment with this in a moment. And then there's improvisation, where you actually transform all or some of the melody, and it may well have no resemblance to the original, although every now and again it's likely in classical or in jazz that you come back and touch base and quote something, or even fall into the actual original for a bit while playing with it, and then go off on another little journey. In other words, you follow the scaffolding of it, just like you follow the scaffolding of your lesson plan, even though you're not following the lesson plan. So, you know, this is not the truth. This is just a handy way to think about steps to improvisation, from following the dots, following the lesson plan, right the way through 4 steps to kind of departing away from it, but not completely letting go of the scaffolding. We could, after here, have music like free music, where you're not following anything at all except the lesson plan that's already in your head. But those 4 is enough. Now, it's not actually, as I've learned, the 50th anniversary of IATEFL. You probably already knew this. It's the 50th conference. I thought it was the 50th birthday, but it isn't, because they had several conferences in some years. So IATEFL is younger than 50 at the moment. One of the exercises that Dolan does is this. He, and happy birthdays, well, let's just go back here. He uses call and response. And that's a kind of really basic thing with mother and child, or in music, different musics around the world. Someone does something and someone else responds to it musically. The blues is all about that. And the blues are like the background of jazz, the background of rock music, etc., etc. This kind of call and response. Refrains, choruses, in sea shanties, in folk songs, in ordinary songs, you know, the chorus, the call and the response, which is something we're very, very used to. And what he does is he plays just a little melody which leaves you hanging and asks the student to reply to it. And the student can't help taking it back where it came from, back into the house. So, for example, if we take Happy Birthday, good example, call and response. So, just think in your head. Can you listen in your head to Happy Birthday, the melody? Just without humming it, hum it internally. Can you hear it? So, happy birthday to, and I go out of the house, out the front door, you, and I've landed somewhere else. There's a little tension. And then the response to that is, happy birthday to, you, we go back in the house. All right? And then typically, something else happens, which is, happy birthday, dear you, go out the back door. Happy birthday to you. See, that's how music works. That stands for all music everywhere. And even in Happy Birthday, if you look at any of the sort of simple ditties and things, that's basically what happens. That's, you know, we know that as the 3-chord trick on a guitar. If you learn the first 3 chords, it's that one, and then it's that one. And then you end up on that one. In the house, out the front door, back to the house, out the back door, back to the house. That's it. And that's how the blues works. The blues does that as well. Okay? So what Dolan does is he just plays a little phrase, a classical phrase. You can see this on the videos, but it leaves. So he says, hello, he leaves the person outside the front door, and automatically the student takes it back here. Now he's not reading that. But there's an intention to go there, a wish, which is not described, not written down in the notes, it just goes there. And then Dolan takes them out the back door. Yeah, and now it's your turn, 2 bars each maybe, and then the student will come back here. So, and these classical musicians are suddenly finding themselves making up bits of music. Because they've got a kind of, you know, what do you do when there isn't a plan? It's that thing, they've got a something. What is it? It's an intention. Well, I know where you go when you come out the front door, you go back inside. So, I've asked you to listen to Happy Birthday internally. Now, you want to do something because this is a workshop. Okay? And what I would like you to do now, please, is to turn to your partner. It's going to seem absurd, and in fact it is. I'd like you to turn to your partner and do, one of you, just do the first one, happy birthday to you, and the other one, take it back into the house, happy birthday to you, just be aware of it. And then the first partner, go out to the back door, happy birthday dear you, whoever you are, happy birthday to you. Just do that very quickly now, come on.
Yes, I teach you this summer. Oh, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine.
So, there is a structure, there is a kind of intention, out the front, back to the house, out the back, back to the house, a kind of intention. So now, let's take it a stage further. And this time, I'd like you to change some notes. So I'm going to demonstrate first. So it could be, and I haven't planned at all, so I don't know what's going to happen, but my intention is to go out that way. Happy birthday to you. And now I've got to get the person back there. Happy birthday to you. And then I've got to get out the other side. Happy birthday, dear Joanna. Happy birthday to you. See? But it's the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. Now, what I'd like you to do, please, is to hear in your mind's ear this song, but sing Happy Birthday and follow the front door, back door thing, but just change some of the notes. And don't worry if it's wrong or right, because they're all wrong. Okay? Just do it in your head. Don't sing. Very quiet. In your head. Are you there? Wait. Shh. In your head. You can be not singing, not singing, not singing. Okay. Now, 1 and 2. So what you're going to do is, in the same pair, you're going to sing a different thing. But you're going to take the person outside the front door, and then your partner's going to take you back in. Then you can take them out the back door and back in. Okay, using quite different melody. Off we go.
Start.
What did you notice about trying to do that? Huh? It's awkward. It is awkward. Did you find it awkward? Why is it awkward?
The model is too powerful.
Because the melody beckons you, and it's hard. Yeah, it's hard to free yourself from the ingrained melody. See, imagine these, and we just find out with Happy Birthday. Imagine these guys reading these complex scores, trying to find liberation. And
opportunity to try something new. Because I was trying to think, how can I sing differently? And I thought, okay, I'm going to do it like rap, for example.
that's it. So if you do it like an opera star, or like rap, or like a blues, then that's one way of giving yourself immediately slotting in a different intention. It kind of helps you to liberate. If you're still thinking you're singing Happy Birthday at your daughter's birthday party, but changing one note, it kind of is too close. It's kind of difficult. Anyway, playing around with improvisation. And here's something that might be interesting. This is Winter Marsalis. So here's a great trumpet player. Can't locate this. Say Nathan, we can't find it. Doesn't like it. Okay, so here's what happens. Here's what happens, all right? So he's at a jazz seminar we're back in jazz now, in France. And the sax player just plays Happy Birthday to on the sax. And Winter Marsalis weaves around, demonstrating not playing the tune. He does it slowly and simply and then fast, and he goes far from the tune, and he goes close to the tune, and then they swap round, and then they both improvise at the same time. I wasn't going to play it all in any case, but maybe I'm not going to play anything. But we could have a taste of that. So if I go, can you sing Happy Birthday? Okay, Happy Birthday to you. Go ahead.
Happy birthday to you.
Happy all I'm trying to show really is the feeling of joy and freedom that comes from taking something quite familiar and then releasing yourself from it. And maybe that's something that we could do as teachers, and maybe that's something we do with our students, and maybe that's a way of helping us to see more about improvisation. Now, there's not much time, so I'm going to go a bit more quickly. Extended school management, complexity. Challenge is the idea that control, is the way to do it. That control is the way to solve problems. Like, to the student, do this task, you'll learn this language, you'll pass this test, you'll open up this future for yourself, and it'll cost you this much. The teacher, if you qualify like this, profession develop like this, follow this practice, do what we say, our organisational plan, this kind of thing. It doesn't work quite like that. So, a tidy mind in a messy world. The emphasis of organisational theory is basically on tidiness and rules and organisation. That's the whole thing about organisational theory. And it was born in a kind of almost the steam age of social thinking about how organisations work, when we had metaphors like steam engines, and but we don't have a methodology for mess, and that's what complexity thinking and systems thinking is about. It's trying to give us a methodology of mess, which is actually closer to reality. So, a couple of quotes just to give you these other directions. What Eric Jansch says. That's what you need to be heading for. Because as long as you head for control, you're not going to get it. And Margaret Wheatley says this. And that these are ought to be basic management principles. Not to say we don't need rules of some kind, but the rules need to enhance our capacity to respond in complex situations, rather than ambush our capacity to respond in complex situations. So here's a term, improvisational inquiry. I don't know if it exists, but maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. This is acknowledge that we improvise. That's the first thing. See that you do it most of the time, at cocktail parties or talking to people on the phone. You do it most of the time. You may not be aware of it, and it may not be very creative improvisation, but it is improvisation. But just see that. Secondly, see that improvisation is an inquiry to it's a way of knowing. Impro is a way of prodding the present moment to see what's going on, and then responding accordingly. More about that in a sec. So, improvisational inquiry, we have a form of what I call on-the-wing inquiry, a discipline for seeing what's going on as we co-create the present moment. We co-create the present moment. So, that bottom paragraph. The present moment isn't something that just arrives. In some cases it does. There is an earthquake, it starts to rain, a disaster happens, or something going. But 99% of our present moments are not like that. 99% of our present moments are co-authored by ourselves. And we draw one or another present moment into existence according to how we play our part in the co-authorship. And you can see that really clearly in lessons. Every lesson, according to your way of dealing with the present moment, so a different lesson comes out. Here's my little mantra, which I already see what's going on. Try to see, I mean, being here now and not stuck too much with my past. I'm not interpreting, but just seeing what's going on. What are the offers? Where are people? Do something different, not because it's better, but because that's a way of prodding to see what's happening. You only find out what's happening by doing something different from what you normally do, and then learn from it. So it's just a little mantra. You can start anywhere with that, but just keep it with you. Very portable. See what's going on, and do something different. Learn from it. And it's a kind of reflective practice, experiential learning cycle. But what it's saying really is that impro is a way of knowing. Impro is a way of, as it were, playing with, playfully engaging with the present moment to see what's going on. Not just with the moment. Not when I wrote my lesson plan that I imagined, but the actual moment. Okay, last few slides. Impro skills in organisations. Here's about 6 qualities which seem to me to characterise organisations that have got the capacity to improvise built into them in some degree. Number 1, intend the future. Now, somehow everybody's involved in growing the intended future. Now, this saying is missions. You've all heard about missions, and you all probably think they're a ghastly idea. The mission statement. Well, it is a ghastly idea because mostly it's not done properly. A few people go off into a mountain retreat for a lot of money, and they come back and they tell you what the mission is. And you don't agree. And so nothing happens, even though it's printed up above the door, and on all the cards that you're given. So what... Shared mission is what it's all about, of course. Everyone's involved in growing the intended future. This idea of an intended future. We don't have to have exactly a map, but as long as we intend the future, we'll get there. Some of us by different routes, but when we arrive there, we'll think again. And, of course, this is the thing. You can't intend someone else's future. That's why they've got to be on board in the creation of the mission statement. The mission statement is a great idea. It's a shared vision. And how do you do that? Well, that's actually the big question. Here's the second. Expect. There shouldn't be an ED there. Expect unexpected changes in unexpected places. Can you expect the unexpected? I'm not sure if that's possible. Is it philosophically possible? Can we do that? Chris? Yeah. You can expect the unexpected. Right. So don't be surprised by unintended consequences. They're not, oh shit, sorry, I didn't think that through. Wow, unintended consequences. Look, so what does that tell me about my thinking, about this organisation and the whole system we're in? That stuff came popping, I did that, but that happened outside the box. And these organisations, people would be ready to forego planning and act in the realness of real life. Guided by what? Well, guided by perhaps a lack of fear of making mistakes, a lack of it being career destroying, etc., etc. But also by a shared intended future. So you kind of know what to do when you go off the lesson plan, when you go off piece, when you go off the plan, you still know what to do. Here's a third one. The people in such organisations, they scan forward to see future scenarios and to learn from the future. Just think about learning from the future. Why not? Learning from what hasn't yet happened. Just look at the future and learn from it. And then scanning back to see what's led to the present. You know, the organisation's backstory, how pressures tell the story of how these pressures affected you. It's not bad and it's not good, but it's good to talk about it because then we begin to intuit the system and to show that there aren't really mistakes, there are outcomes. And the outcomes are really interesting once we divest them of mistake status. And look sideways to see the disconnected silos, even in the school that I work in, and how can we connect them up so that we are mutual and connected, and have an intelligence that is additive. Peter Senge said famously, he's a systems thinker and a business guru, he said, how come it is that a team of top managers with individual IQs of over 160 can have a group IQ of 67? Because, you know, of connectivity. Another thing is just enough rules to keep purpose or intention in place, so we can improvise without being ambushed by it. Organisations need innovation. Often their rule system ambushes any innovation. But they can't cope with the innovation. So stop being creative, will you? Because this is an organisation. We've got a business to run. Can't be creative here. Last two. Conceptualise schools as sites where improvisation occurs. Any organisation, but let's talk about schools. So somehow legitimise improv, have a way of looking at moments of improvisation, of talking about it, feeding back on it. This is a challenge. And encourage playfulness. Playful play. So, improvisation has to serve the whole. And if it's done in a disconnected way, you can find that there are problems because you create more difficulties for other people that are disconnected. So, improv is not the only thing to do, and you can't just go and do it without taking into account everybody else. So it's just one, it's not a panacea, it's one tool, but it's a tool that we don't look at. So this is my final thing. Actually, this is my final slide. Sorry. I thought I was wrong. This is the final slide. Impro's everywhere. What we need to do is see that we do it, starting with our own experience, legitimise it, talk about it, and perhaps develop our version of improvisation inquiry. Or it will go unseen and carry on affecting things, but we don't get any better at this particular life-giving, moving part of what we do in management and in schools. Did you enjoy that?
That was rushing. Black